36 to the end from there. We're in Luke 24, starting at verse 36, and we'll read to the end of the chapter.
Okay, we're starting in verse 28.
Sorry, we're going to
No,
back
you're
up to
good.
verse 28.
I don't know. I don't know where to start.
He just loves that section, so we got to do it.
No worries.
Yeah.
So they drew near to the village to which they were going. He acted as if he were going further, but they urged him strongly, saying, "Stay with us, for it is toward evening, and the day is now far spent." So he went in to stay with them. When he was at table with them, he took the bread and blessed and broke it and gave it to them. And their eyes were opened, and they recognized him, and he vanished from their sight. They said to each other, "Did not our hearts burn within us while he talked to us on the road, while he opened to us the scriptures?" And they rose that same hour and returned to Jerusalem. And they found the 11 and those who were with them gathered together, saying, "The Lord has risen indeed. He has appeared to Simon." Then they told what had happened on the road and how he was known to them in the breaking of the bread. As they were talking about these things, Jesus himself stood among them, and he said to them, "Peace to you." But they were startled and frightened and thought they saw a spirit. And he said to them, "Why are you troubled, and why do doubts arise in your hearts? See my hands and my feet, that it is I myself. Touch me and see, for a spirit does not have flesh and bones, as you see that I have." And when he had said this, he showed them his hands and his feet. While they still disbelieved for joy, and were marveling, he said to them, "Have you anything here to eat?" And they gave him a piece of broiled fish, and he took it and ate before them. Then he said to them, "These are my words that I spoke to you while I was still with you, that everything written about me in the law of Moses and the prophets and the Psalms must be fulfilled." Then he opened their minds to understand the scriptures and said to them, "Thus it is written, that the Christ should suffer and on the third day rise from the dead, and that repentance and forgiveness of sins should be proclaimed in his name to all nations, beginning from Jerusalem. You are my witnesses of these things, and behold, I am sending the promise of my Father upon you. But stay in the city until you are clothed with power from on high." Then he led them out as far as Bethany, and lifting up his hands, he blessed them. While he blessed them, he parted from them and was carried up into heaven. And they worshipped him and returned to Jerusalem with great joy, and were continually in the temple blessing God.
Thank you, Jaina. That is the completion of the reading of the Gospel of Luke. Pretty amazing. Wow, where do we start, guys? There's so much to unpack there. You wanted to back up to verse 28, so
I just wanted to get that
Emmaus piece. So,
well, one thing I think is interesting is I was reading a Greek commentary on the kind of what's going on in the text here, and when the two are walking on the road before Jesus catches up with them, there's the hair floating. The word is really strong for them discussing what is going on. It's more of like debating, which if you have been in the East, you know it's a very fine line between discussing and debating. It's very emotional and very passionate. And that's very, it's interesting to me because it's, I don't know, that is more personal. It just reminds me of kind of being in Israel and seeing Jewish people just talk to one another. And it is just like, you'd think they hate each other, but they just are, everything they say is with like 100% conviction and passion. And I mean, even our bus drivers were just very intense people. And so I can imagine their discussion walking as they are debating / discussing very emotionally and passionately about what's going on and arguing with one another. That's really, I can imagine. And then Jesus kind of shows them and goes, "Hey, what are you talking about?" And something funny is, I didn't realize the irony of it, which is kind of the point of it though, is, they say, are you the only one who hasn't understood what's gone on in Jerusalem this weekend? It's funny because it's not only like, oh, of course I know it, though. He is the only one who understands what's going on. That's the point of this text, is no one's eyes are open. No one understands what's going on. He is actually the only one who understood what actually happened in this past weekend in Jerusalem. So I thought it was funny.
It is.
They don't know what they're saying.
Yeah. I wonder if he's just as animated when he's telling the story.
Oh yeah, I mean, it's fun. Yeah, I would imagine. Just being a rabbi, that's probably how he teach anyway. But
yeah.
Well, I mean, it kind of seems aggressive him saying, "Oh, foolish one, slow of heart to believe." It's like, you'd think it's like, wow, he's being so rude, but he's probably matching their energy with which they are debating the text. I doubt he is just being unnecessarily pushy. They are just always pushy, and so that's probably exactly how they're talking to one another. I mean, I was listening to a Orthodox modern day rabbi talk today, and he was debating someone. He's like, "Well, if that's the case, we'll just throw away the Bible then." And everything's very dramatic and like very extreme. And that's what they meant by abolish the law. It's, well, if what you say is true, we should just take the Bible and throw it in the trash then. Everything is very personal and like a matter of life and death. So I would imagine it's that same passion, that it's I don't know. I think he's very with a lot of conviction. They're discussing it, which I love because they're very hurt about what they perceive has happened the past weekend.
Yeah, awesome. So in verse 33, we see that they return at once to Jerusalem, and there's a couple other Jerusalem references that are made between now and the end of the chapter. I would like to hear anybody else please weigh in, but could you guys just speak a little bit to not just the centrality of Jerusalem in biblical lands, but really it's central to it's the center of all nations as far as the Jews themselves were concerned. So Jerusalem's going to continue to play a very pivotal role. It's going to be mentioned often in the book of Acts. Even the Jerusalem Council in Acts chapter 15 is going to take place there.
Yeah.
So I just would like to hear some thoughts on just the city of Jerusalem, the purpose of Jerusalem. Some others may have some additional questions, but that's what's kind of floating around in my head.
It is interesting because Israel as a whole, the Promised Land, and Jerusalem especially, if you look at world history, I mean, even just secular world history, it's just always at the crossroads of the world. And it's always, I have a book I'm reading about geography, and it's the way he describes it is with cats and mice, and how there's always I think it's like the big cat's on the prowl, but then there's the mice, and Israel's always the mouse. And it's always Assyria or Babylon or Persia or Greece or Rome and the Seleucids. They're the cats fighting each other, and Israel just happens to get in the way. You wouldn't see that reading First and Second Kings or Chronicles. It seems like, Israel is fighting back, but it's really Israel is just this postage stamp of a sized country. And Assyria is trying to go to Egypt, and Israel happens to get in the way, so they kind of just take them with them. And that's how exile happens, but they are just always in the center of the world, which was God's plan to put his chosen people as the light of the world from Isaiah in the center of the world to illuminate the world. I mean, but Jerusalem is kind of even the center of that. It is, the center of the, to them, the known world. It's pretty fascinating. I mean, it's the Mediterranean's just to the west where all the ships trade routes go in, and was even more, so I'm getting kind of nerdy, but it was even more amplified in their day because Caesar Augustus had basically tamed the Mediterranean, gotten rid of any pirates. So it was safer than ever for travel. So even more travel happening on the Mediterranean. The King's Highway go in the Way of the Sea, the Via Maris, all three main trade routes go right by Jerusalem. Those were all taken control of and pretty free of bandits because of the Roman army. So it's like everyone in the world is walking by Jerusalem. Which is cool. I mean, it's the spice trade goes, through the valley where David and Goliath fought. The spice trade then goes straight through that. I mean, millions and millions and millions of people have been traveling straight through. So Jerusalem is central geographically, it is central for interacting with people and being the light to the nations.
Yeah.
God commanded them to be the light of the nations in Isaiah, and then gave them the positioning to actually be able to do that. He didn't put them over in Eastern China and says, now be the light to the nations, and then figure out, well, how are we going to get there? He puts them in the position to be successful for that.
Yeah. Awesome. Great. Thank you. What are the questions that you have? We've obviously just read through the text, a little bit of reflections here as kind of wrapping up this Emmaus Road encounter. But anybody have a question or an observation before yes, Jen, Lisa.
Well, did y'all say, or I heard somewhere else that this was the time that God had set aside for Jesus to come, because all these, it was so open and the roads and everything.
Yeah.
I mean, wasn't this kind of the plan all along?
If you were to go there and you were to ask why now, if you're in the first century, say why now? We don't have an answer, but it's, why not 40 years before when Rome was a lot calmer? Why not 60 years after when it was way crazier? Why like then? It is interesting because there's this one thing that comes to mind when you said that was there's this interesting road system that goes everywhere in the known world that Rome built. The point was, and this is where you kind of start, and this is a beautiful introduction to Acts, is the point was Caesar Augustus and Julius Caesar and Caesar Augustus both built these Rome's roads all over the known world, this beautiful cobblestone road that's easy to walk on, so that they could bring the gospel of Caesar to the world. That's exactly what he called it, the gospel of salvation published by Caesar, Lord and Savior of the world, the gospel of peace that goes to the world. That was the Pax Romana, the Roman peace. Paul used those very same roads to go right back and tell them of the true king. And that was, when you see one of those, you're like, wow, God commissioned Paul to go and tell them who is actually Lord of the world, but he made Caesar build the own roads for his own demise. It's hilarious. So if he's going to pick a time to go in, that's a great time to go in, because these roads that Caesar built to spread his gospel, Paul used to spread the gospel right back. So why that period of human history, I'd probably say that. And I mean, if you want to get like theological, I would say that with Daniel, that aligns with the fourth beast from Daniel. That is the fourth major world empire, which we looked at Daniel 7 as being intentionally blurred with, that fourth world empire from a secular perspective is being intentionally blurred with the beast, the truest, the beast of beasts, right? The one that won't go away. And that is why in their mind, of course, it was Rome was the enemy and not Satan, because in their mind, the third beast was Greece. So clearly the fourth beast is Rome. And that is what Jesus is saying, but the fourth beast he'll deal with once and for all. And if he just deals with Rome, the beast still, is there. So,
Okay. Follow up? Any other thoughts or questions? Anything else you see in this section that you want to talk about or address before moving on to the next piece?
In 21, but we had hoped that he was the one to redeem Israel. Of course, we said that kind of harkens back to Zechariah's language about Jesus being the hope and redeemer of Israel. But that is Exodus language, where God redeems his people with an outstretched arm from Pharaoh, which we went through in Luke. That is the whole theme of Luke, especially in the Passion narrative, this is the new Exodus. He is the new Moses and the Passover lamb. These are the people coming out of Exodus. And it's interesting because in their framework, in their mind, this can't have been the new Exodus that they were hoping for if the leader of it suffered and died at the hands of the enemy. But that is exactly what causes the new Exodus. That's why it's like, you're so slow and foolish to believe all that has been spoken of in the scriptures. So he goes back and shows them how it is necessary that the Messiah should suffer and die and then enter into glory. That is how the new Exodus comes about. So their hopes is that he was the one to redeem Israel, but they had no shelf space in their head that what could happen as the Messiah died for his enemies. But that in Jesus' mind, that is how it happens. And I just think it's interesting they're using Exodus language because in their mind, they're ready for the new Exodus and they don't even realize it already happened. But yeah, and that wasn't not necessary that the Christ should suffer these things and enter into glory. And I think the emphasis there is entering into glory. It's not so much that he died, now he rose, now he's alive. Well, what is, that's great for him, I guess, but what's the point? And the point that I think Luke is emphasizing is that now he's entered into his glory, meaning the cross and resurrection was the means through which now he's been glorified, which then would be a fulfillment, a kind of a bookend on the trial scene where Jesus basically in a sentence narrates what's about to happen in the trial and the death and the resurrection, where he says, from now on, you will see the Son of Man seated at the right hand of the power of God. That's just, you keep that written at the top of your page, like the running header throughout the rest of Luke, because this is how the rest of Luke will go. The running head is from now on, the Son of Man will be seated at the right hand of the power of God, no matter what it looks like or seems like, or you think is going to happen. This is how it happens. So that seems to be kind of the capstone of that, is that was what was necessary for the Messiah to then enter into glory and be seated at the right hand of God, which is about to happen as he ascends.
Yeah, sure. It's kind of fascinating too in this last section how he actually revisits themes that he's been preaching and teaching throughout, and then kind of throws a little bit of it's not really a curveball, but it's maybe introducing or alluding to repentance in a little bit of a different way, maybe adding it as a qualifier to kingdom living. But it's just, I don't know, it's just very intriguing. So Jesus comes here and he speaks. What's his very first word that he speaks?
What?
Peace.
Oh,
yeah. He speaks peace. And I think that's so incredible in verse 36. How many times has he done that? I'm not looking for an exact number, but it's pretty common, right, for his ministry that when people are afraid or when darkness looms or whatever it is that's going on, Jesus he'll either speak peace or he'll ask a question about, why are you afraid? What are you fearful of? And so this is really intriguing. And I don't want to get ahead of you guys here. You may have something else you want to look at in that previous section. But I'd like to build a bridge and move into this next.
Well, the emphasis really seems to be fear, worry, confusion all throughout. Meanwhile, everything's fine. They don't realize it. Everything's fine. All the while, they're terrified. The women are scared at the tomb. They're all confused and about what's going on. Meanwhile, everything is fine. They just don't realize that. One thing that was interesting pretty quickly was the where is it? The Aesop's Fable reference. Foolish one, slow of heart to believe Oh, foolish ones and slow of heart. So there's actually, I remember, if you remember way back in the Jesus and John the Baptist story, where John's in prison, sends his disciples, Jesus responds with that sixfold answer with one missing from Isaiah, all that stuff. And he quotes Aesop's fables twice in that, talking about the fox, right?
Yeah.
I forget what they were already.
Tree.
The tree and the weed and there's one more, and I can't remember what it is. Oh, the fisherman and I played the flute for you, you didn't dance. I sing that, yeah. But here's another one here where there's an Aesop's fable which predates Jesus by hundreds of years, where there's a story of a fox who was thirsty, so he went to a well, but he jumped in, and then he couldn't get out. Then a goat came by, and he was thirsty, and the fox convinced him from the bottom of the well to jump in and get a drink. So the goat jumped in, and he said, well, now we're both stuck. Then the fox convinced the goat to put his front legs up on the side of the well, and the fox can jump up on his back and then jump out of the well. The goat did it. And then the fox gets out. Well, he told him, I'll help us both out if you'll help me out. And then he gets out, and then he doesn't keep his word, and he's going to walk away, and the goat's pleading with him to come help him. And the fox tells him, oh, foolish one and slow of heart, if you had as much wit as the hairs on your head, you would have thought about what you did before you did it. And it's pretty interesting because the point of that is you're foolish and slow of heart because you didn't think things through ahead of time, which is exactly what Jesus is saying. There's a second one that's quicker. It's basically the son, S-U-N, is having a wedding. And the son is a male in this instance, but the son is having a wedding, and all the frogs in the world are at the wedding banquet. The frogs are all singing and celebrating, and then one of the frogs stands up mourning and says, oh, foolish ones and slow of heart, don't you realize we won't benefit from this? Because if the sun dries up our mud in the heat of summer, how much worse will it be when he has children who do the same? Meaning if there's a son, apparently, who has multiple children, and there's multiple sons, he's going to dry up our mud even more. So why are you celebrating? You're celebrating now, but you didn't think things through ahead of time, what it is you're even thinking about. So you're slow of heart and foolish. And that seems to be what Jesus is quoting here, is that you're slow of heart and foolish. You didn't think things like, you know the scriptures, but you didn't think them through ahead of time enough to know that this was necessary for the Messiah to suffer and enter into glory. Which again, I think is a cool example of Jesus using just common, that doesn't mean Aesop's fable is inspired literature, but it does mean that Jesus used Aesop's fable and knew it, and then reshaped it and used phrases from it for his own purpose to prove points, which I think is pretty cool, which he's done that many times, but I thought it was pretty funny.
That is really interesting. I've never heard that associated with this particular text. So that's really fascinating.
I hadn't until about 30 minutes before we came.
Okay, well, there you go. There you go. We're always in discovery mode, right? So that's a good thing. That's a good thing. Anybody have any thoughts or questions related to what we looked at so far? Observations? Don't be shy. So Jesus disappears from their sight in verse 31, and he reappears a little bit later here in the text in verse 36 and then 37. They think they're seeing a ghost, or I think literally it's a spirit. So what's going on here? Physically, there's really no way to know exactly. Was there some transcendent the laws of physics and the laws of biology and science, or
it seems to be. It's weird because Luke is trying, especially writing to a Greek-minded reader, Theophilus, he's trying to emphasize certain things because it seems to be that since the Greek mind was this will relate to people, but since they were so Gnostic, so it's called dualist Gnosticism, where, heaven is good, earth is bad, physical is bad, spiritual is good. That is basically, people usually have functioning versions of that in their head, but he's trying to really combat that by showing, Jesus is incarnate, he is enfleshed, he eats, a spirit doesn't eat. If spirit, and that's Jesus even says, a spirit doesn't have flesh and bones. I'm not a spirit. But for some reason, people's perception of Jesus' resurrection body is that he was still a spirit for some reason. But spirit can't eat food, and food would just go right through you. But he is different, and that seems to be what Luke is emphasizing, is that he clearly is transformed and different because he's received his resurrection body, which is Paul's point in 1 Corinthians 15. But he isn't a spirit. The God's purposes for the material physical world are still the same, are still good, and that creation is still good, although it's currently flawed and will be put back to right. It's not abolished or obliterated, but be put back to what it was supposed to be. So I think he's really trying to emphasize the physicality of Jesus while emphasizing the fact that he had changed, which is, he does it pretty well, because it's how he eats fish and they touch him, but he also disappears. Well, it's like, so is he a ghost? Well, no, obviously not. But is he fully, as he was before? Well, clearly not, because before he wasn't walking through doors and vanishing. So something's clearly different, but he is still physical. It's very strange, but that is Luke's, I think his whole point is to show all the resurrection accounts. Really, that is one of their main points, is to show Jesus' resurrection body is physical, which has connotations for us. That is the point of 1 Corinthians 15, Paul's whole language on the resurrection body is we are physical, we're not spiritual. You don't die and become a ghost or a spirit or a soul floating in the air. You will be raised from the dead and given a physical, real, new body, not you'll become a spirit. That's Gnosticism. Which, there's a whole, that's the Gospel of John mostly, though. He's trying to combat all of that.
Yeah. So I don't know. I know that the Mormon faith has some pretty unique understandings on this physical body of Christ, this new physical body of Christ. So would we say that this is Christ glorified as he ultimately will be glorified, or is there a glorification that is unique once he ascends to be at the right hand of the Father? And it may not matter in some ways, but just out of curiosity, I don't know if you've done any exploration there or have any thoughts on that.
I don't know anything about the Mormon point of view. That's pretty interesting.
Yeah, I'd have to do some digging. Some of y'all may know, but it's a literal physical body, and that's Jesus's state currently.
Yeah.
It's been several years since I've talked about even read that, so I may be misquoting. For those online, you can fact check me and make sure I'm tracking the right way here. But basically, the body that he had at this moment in time is still the body that he has.
That is a hard question, because the tomb is clearly empty. So what happened to his body? Well, he's in his body, but is it the same body? Well, he still has the nail marks and the thing in the side, the mark in his ribs, but he can walk through doors, but he can also eat fish. So that is the tension of how is he transformed. And that you can read 1 Corinthians 15, and you can see all the metaphors and imagery Paul tries to give, and he still cannot really fully explain what it is like, because it's so hard. He's like, okay, let's go with the seed. Just in the same way the seed is buried and then transforms, the seed is physical, and the plant that it grows into is physical, but it's clearly different, right? A seed doesn't, bear fruit like an apple tree does, but it is still physical. It's just clearly different. And he used a different illustration, the same thing. So he's trying to explain how something can be different, but also the same as it were before. So that is the tension. And I don't know fully what Mormons believe, but that is hard. Yeah. I would, in our context, I would tend to emphasize the physicality of Jesus because many people are kind of functioning Gnostics, where it's going to heaven means you die and then go live in the spirit world somewhere, and then you sit on a cloud and you're immaterial, and that is not it. I mean, that's the opposite of the Bible. It's actually closer to hell, quite honestly. That's more how hell is personified in the Bible, is that you're immaterial and not resurrected and hardly existing, and that is closer. Even C.S. Lewis' perception in The Great Divorce, that is basically how he describes hell. It's how we generally describe heaven, because it's not the pleasure aspect of it, but the fact that, we are immaterial and floating in souls, and that is Gnosticism. That's why John spends the whole first chapter trying to emphasize that it was good and necessary that the Son of God incarnated and took on flesh. It's good that he took on flesh. Flesh is good. Physicality is good. God made the physical world. It's good, but it's broken. And so in order to give you an imperishable body, as Paul would say, he's got to kill you, allow you to die, so he can raise you from the dead. Because a seed has to fall on the ground first before it grows and is raised. So okay, it's a lot.
Let me throw some more mud into this puddle.
What do you say?
Let me throw some more mud into this image puddle. If you jump over to Revelation, there you have the image of the Lamb sitting on the throne. It looks like it was slain.
Yeah.
Okay.
So what kind of body is that?
Well, it's a metaphor. Yeah. Well, yeah.
It's metaphor. I mean, that's Jesus, obviously. Yeah. But that's not the body that walked out of the tomb, I wouldn't think.
Yeah, it's definitely Revelation's cool. Once I was talking about earlier, you read the rest of the New Testament really in the light of Caesar's gospel, the gospel of Roman salvation, the golden age that Julius Caesar were to bring us, which I think John is mocking in Revelation 21 with the 1,000-year reign. It's, you read the rest of the New Testament in that light, And then you really see the kingdom versus kingdom stuff going on, in which I think that lamb thing is a metaphor then for the slain lamb who takes on the beast of the world, but as a lamb who gives himself. Because before the battle begins in that scene, the lamb is already bloody because he's already given himself for his enemies. So before the battle begins, it's already won. So he doesn't need to fight Rome because he's already defeated the beast. Oh man, it's cool. Revelation is so cool. But it's but interesting thing in Revelation also is these souls who are under the altar who have been slain for their testimony, who had been beheaded, are asking God how long, because this isn't their final state. Their final state's not to be disembodied, but to be re-embodied. And so their final state is how long until we're embodied. We're tired of being like this. So it's.
I'm glad my salvation doesn't depend on the answers to those questions.
No, it does not.
Yes. Alan said he's glad our salvation doesn't depend on the answers to those questions, and so that's really good.
It's funny.
Okay, so something that's intriguing here, as we first started this study, Tyler and Jaina have conditioned me as I read the Bible. I read it a little differently now, and there are a lot of words that I used to overlook. I'm intrigued by Jesus standing among them. Why standing? Is it important at all? In verse 36, when they were still talking about this, Jesus himself stood. I found a few references of Abraham, for example, standing among the three visitors, the Lord standing with Moses. It may just be that he's just standing. There may be nothing to it at all. But is that a rabbinic posture? Is there something there that's
rabbinic posture is you sit while you teach.
Okay, so I thought that was the case for teaching.
Yeah.
Okay.
I don't know why he's standing, but I do think there's a parallel with Genesis 18, Abraham and the three strangers, with the fact that he is now eating, because it took Abraham a second to realize he's eating a meal with God in flesh, however that looks, himself. And then these disciples don't realize they're eating a meal with God in flesh himself. And what had just happened is Abraham just made a covenant in chapter 15 with the Lord. And in Genesis 18, part of the terms of it's called a suzerain vassal treaty. Part of the terms of a covenant in their context was you eat a meal together with both parties. So that's what's happening in Genesis 18. But Abraham takes him a second to realize that. And this is the same. It seems to be the same thing happening with the new covenant. Is now they're eating the meal together. I think it a bit harkens back to the sulcha, the peace meal between two offended parties. So this would be their kind of meal showing everything's okay. So Genesis 18 thing too, I think is pretty spot on.
Yeah.
And in both cases, in the case with Abraham, it's interesting because what he does is allows, if you don't know the story, basically just God comes in flesh with two strangers who appear to be angels. And then they come and eat a meal with Abraham and Sarah. A really cool story Jesus makes allusion to. I know we talked about it once with him saying the kingdom of heaven's like the woman who's kneaded 3 measures of flour into bread. But the context of it is that Abraham props up this stranger in his mind as a total stranger. You reading the text know, just like this, you reading the text know that it's the Lord. Abraham doesn't, but Abraham shows hospitality anyway and treats this man as the patriarch and head of the home. So he stands by as the Lord eats, which is what usually the servant does for the patriarch. And in this case, Jesus says the blessing and breaks the bread. And while they all stand by, that's what the patriarch does, but he's just a stranger in their mind. But reading the text, you know that he is the resurrected Jesus. So it seems to be a direct parallel between both of those.
Yeah.
Which is pretty cool.
That is very cool. That's very cool.
Yeah. Luke, that's why I love Luke. He's a Gentile who loves the Old Testament.
Maybe we should affectionately start calling you Luke. So who knows? Who knows?
It's funny because way more than Matthew. I remember
Yeah.
saying this like the first week of class. Way more than Matthew, Luke uses the Old Testament, and he's not even Jewish.
Yeah.
So he's Greek. He had to learn it at some point he had to sit down and start learning it, which is pretty cool.
That's awesome. I've talked enough about things that I'm seeing here. What are y'all seeing that gets your attention, or some things we want to plumb? And you guys may also have a few other points that you want to make as we continue on. So other thoughts that you have?
Right, just one thing I noticed when y'all were reading from whatever version you're reading from, you're always saying at table.
Yeah.
Mhm.
And my version always says the table.
Yeah.
So
Is it NIV?
what's the difference? Does it matter?
The Greek is just at table, but that was like kind of the proper way to say, like in the Last Supper account, he says they reclined at table. It's just a way to say they reclined at the table. But the way that they reclined at the table is like they reclined at table together. I don't know how to explain that well. The whole event is called reclining at table. Kind of like the whole event is called the breaking of bread, even though we're having a full meal and not just bread. Kind of the same thing. But the Greek literally is just reclined at table.
Well,
So.
like at the Writing Center, when ones from other countries come and they read their manuscripts. A lot of times they won't say the university.
Mhm.
Oh, really?
They went to university.
Mhm.
Oh, interesting.
Mhm.
So that may be the same.
Yeah.
Mhm.
That'd be pretty good. Yeah.
The Brits say hospital. I'm not going to the hospital. I'm
Really?
going to hospital.
Going
yeah.
to hospital.
Yeah. Yeah. It's fascinating.
Huh.
Fascinating.
Kind of turned it to a verb.
Yeah. It'd be hospital in.
Yeah.
right? Kind of a verb.
Hospitaled.
So, yeah. Yeah. A new way for you to approach work every day. You're hospitaling. Yeah.
In 45, it says he opened their minds so they could understand the scripture. And then he says, and he told them, this is what is written. And then he goes, is this a direct quote? Is this a compilation of how he opened up their minds to see the scriptures? It all makes sense now. It's a summary of that, or I'm just wondering, what are we supposed to, this is what is written. Is that just a summary of what?
Yeah. Seems like it would be.
Yeah.
Is there a direct quote there?
There's not. Let me see if
It
there's a
doesn't
quote.
look like a direct quote.
All nations, I guess, would be direct quote. But it's only 2 words.
It comes from his
From
own.
Isaiah.
It comes from his own teaching.
Yeah.
I mean, he's kind of quoting himself.
It could just be a summary statement of what they concluded once
How
they.
he is taught
Yeah.
the scriptures. I was just kind of wondering.
Yeah. In 45, it says, he opened up their minds to understand the scriptures, and he said to them, thus it is written that the Messiah should suffer. So it could be that this is a summary of, now that we've walked through the scriptures, now we can conclude, thus it was necessary all these things take place. So it doesn't seem to be a direct, because I mean, none of these are direct quote from the Old Testament,
Right.
but the pattern, the messianic patterns are all there.
And I'm assuming that's probably the same thing that he did on the road to Emmaus.
Yeah, that one seems more, he marches them through, starting with the Torah and the law and the prophets, marches them through the story and how that pertains to him, and how then we can conclude from this, specifically from the suffering. I mean, he says it's necessary that he suffer before entering the glory. That is huge in Isaiah, of course, the suffering servant. That is all the poems, and kind of seems like he's walking through the themes of the suffering. Well, there's that reminded me, thank you, of something I read from a commentary was great, but kind of hurting, because Luke really flips it on you here, because we know that Jesus is walking with them. They don't realize that it's Jesus. So we're kind of given this insight that they don't know, and they're kind of out of the loop. And then the next scene is immediately Jesus walks them through the scriptures, but we don't know what he said. Now we're out of the loop, and he creates this thing in you, and you're like, well, I want to know what he said.
Yeah.
And it's like, that's Luke's whole point, is if you want to know what he said, and you want your heart to burn within you, you got to go yourself to Genesis, march through the scriptures, and realize how they all pertain to Jesus as the suffering servant. Okay. So now you're brought out of the loop, and that kind of curiosity and that uneasy feeling of, I want to know, because every commentary is like, if only we knew what he said, which I think is Luke's point, because he could have told you what he said, right. But his whole point is, if you want to know what he said, you got to do what I did as Luke and go back to Genesis and march through and understand the scriptures. So it's this really uneasy feeling.
Yeah. Well, great question, Kelly. Thank you. It's so fascinating as you look at just juxtaposition of words and phrases, and the scope, not just of Jesus's ministry, but the scope of all creation. And so little bitty things just intrigue me, and maybe it's just because I'm weird. I don't really know, but it's like Jesus has descended into the depths, of hell. He has overcome ultimate darkness. He is totally reversed the trajectory that mankind put into place, and he has experienced something that we could live 1,000 years and still not grasp exactly what's going on. And of all of the things that he could say, or all of the questions that he could ask, he asked, so do you have something to eat?
Yeah.
Isn't that fascinating?
But
there's a point here, right?
Oh yeah. The center point of all of I would say all of creation and the scriptures and the story of the Gospels is the incarnation and death and resurrection, bodily resurrection of Jesus. That suddenly, unexpectedly, in the middle of human history, Jesus incarnated, came into the world, died, was raised bodily, and to prove that he's like, I need something to eat.
Yeah.
And then when you see not a spirit, not a ghost, but the actual raised from the dead Jesus eating, then it's like, well, something is clearly different.
Mm.
All of creation has now been reoriented around this moment
Mhm.
where Jesus is proving that, no, I'm not a spirit. I
Mhm.
physically raised from the dead.
Mhm.
You're not seeing a vision.
Yeah.
Can you imagine handing a piece of fish to him, just being like, what is about to happen? And then he just eats it like a normal person. And you're like,
Right,
oh,
right.
okay.
Right.
But now you have to cope with the fact that we saw him dead, but now he's eating fish.
Yeah.
And he's clearly the same person. So now and I like your Tim Keller quote from your sermon last time, that he's like, you don't have to deal with the hard text in the Bible. You don't have
Right.
to deal with what the Bible says about whatever the hardest issues. You have to deal with the fact that either Jesus raised from the dead bodily or he
Yeah.
didn't.
Yeah.
You don't have to worry about all that stuff if you don't worry about what Christians, if speaking to an unbeliever, don't worry about what Christians say about whatever sexuality, because you have to first cope with the fact if Jesus didn't raise from the dead, then just think we're crazy. That's fine. But you have to cope with that first. I mean, this is, and then you have to reorient your entire mind around it does not really matter what I like or don't like. It's Jesus raised from the dead. So I guess he's boss now. And that's exactly what the ascension is.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Well, we don't get certain aspects in this resurrection account that we get in some of the other gospels.
Yeah.
And so we hear about the word doubt is used here, but we don't hear the story of Thomas specifically.
Yeah.
The walking along the seashore in John 21 is also omitted here, although that's another eating scene, right?
Yeah.
Where they're having breakfast together. And so what do you think Luke is focusing on? What Luke is focusing on? What's he trying to drive home here? Is he's kind of and maybe I put it this way. There's a uniqueness here, right? Because he knows that he's not actually ending his story.
Yeah.
So this is the end. This is the end of part one.
Yeah.
Right.
And the end of part one is the beginning of part two.
Yes.
It's just an expanding of the ascension story.
Yeah. But there's some elements we don't see here that we see in other gospel writers. Is anything get your attention there that's intriguing? Or
New creation. John and Luke make it pretty clear. New creation has begun with the first day of the week. First day, new creation. On the Sabbath day of the old creation, of course, still creation, but the Sabbath day, God rested, but God no longer rests in a pleasant shalom way. It's God rest in a tomb. God the Son rest in a tomb. First day of the week, the second Adam. In John, they think he's the gardener because that's where the second Adam would be, is a garden, like the first Adam would be. Now the second Adam, is raised from the dead and then gives them food to eat. Their eyes are open, same thing as Garden Eden. So he's really hammering home the point that this is the new creation, way ahead of time. And even Jews today, they will think that when the Messiah comes, there will be peace on earth. And we're saying we agree when the Messiah comes. But for some reason, 2,000 years ago, unexpectedly, he shortcutted and decided to come halfway through creation to partially bring peace on earth and partially start new creation, partially raise us spiritually from the dead ahead of time. Don't know why. I mean, he just did. So it's, he is really trying to show how new creation has been shortcutted way ahead of time, unexpectedly. So definitely new creation, definitely new covenant, him eating with the disciples, their covenant meal. The suffering servant being vindicated is huge, I think, in this kind of theme, because Mark doesn't pick up. I mean, Mark picks up on the suffering servant a lot, but more so as an anti-Caesar thing. I would say the biggest thing Luke is doing that, of course, Matthew, Mark, and John don't do is the ascension, because that is kind of how Luke drives home his point. Is because I would say Luke then, like I said, book ends the trial scene with Jesus, that very informative statement. From now on, you will see the Son of Man seated at the right hand of the power of God. And then he ascends to be seated at the right hand of the power of God. So you're in your mind, it's okay. Everything between here and here is what it took for the beast to be defeated from Daniel, so that the Son of Man could be seated at the hand of the Most High. So I think that is a theme that Matthew, Mark, and John don't. They pick up on it, but not because Luke's the only one that records the ascension, of course. So they don't pick up on it in that way.
Yeah.
John definitely picks up on the serpent, the beast being defeated, but not the ascension as much. So
okay,
a lot of themes working.
Yeah, absolutely. Matthew and Mark basically end with the Great Commission, or at least toward the end. And Luke kind of points to the Great Commission, but just not Jesus quoting it necessarily in the same way that Matthew and Mark do. But you're witnesses to these things. I'm going to send you.
Yeah.
So it's still the Great, it's the Great Commission. It's just not worded as clearly as it is in Matthew and Mark.
A funny thing that I didn't realize that I had to learn was we kind of get the Great Commission confused with the ascension. What's funny is all authority on earth has been given to me. So go and make disciples, all nations, baptizing the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. That's not the ascension, which is funny because Jesus, and if you want to know how a rabbi teaches, Jesus took them from Jerusalem, then told them, go meet me in Galilee at the mountain. This is in Matthew. Go meet me at the mountain in Galilee that I told you about, probably Mount Arbel. It's 100 miles north, more than 100 miles north. They get there. He gives them a command that takes 10 seconds to say, and it makes them walk all the way back to Jerusalem for the ascension. 200 miles to give them a command you can say in 10 seconds.
Wow.
Because he wants them to stand over the mountain overlooking Upper Galilee and look at where I walked on water. Look at where I called you at Bethsaida, at Capernaum, at Nazareth. Look at where I cast out the demons from the man in the Decapolis. You look at all these places. I want you look at where I made you disciples. And now I want you to go make disciples of all nations. And then makes them walk 132 miles back to the Mount of Olives for the ascension. It's pretty funny. I mean, that's how you make sure you never forget a point, is by making them walk 300 miles, 160. What is it? Oh my gosh.
Yeah.
Sorry, there's no math in seminary, but you make them walk hundreds of miles back to prove your teaching. Because you want them to see with your eyes, physical, concrete, where I made you disciples, so you know to make others disciples.
So when I preach my last sermon here, we're going to walk like to Waco or something. So we'll look back. So that's really great insight. Thank you for sharing.
But
that.
Luke wants to keep them in Jerusalem.
Yeah.
Because Luke's whole narrative has been leading up to Jerusalem.
Right.
From the transfiguration right after Jesus sets his face to go to Jerusalem. The whole narrative is that travelogue leading up to Jerusalem for what they think is the fight, which ends up being the real fight against the beast. Then they're walking away from Jerusalem because they're like, well, we thought he was the one to redeem Israel. Now they're walking away from Jerusalem. And Jesus goes, no, go back to Jerusalem and stay there until Pentecost comes. It's like, no, we're not leaving Jerusalem just because you think I lost because I was crucified, because I'm risen. That is the victory. Now we go back to Jerusalem like the whole plan was. Right. So Luke seems to kind of nix out the actual Great Commission, and he just alludes to it because he's trying to keep them in Jerusalem so he can write Acts and show how Acts goes out from Jerusalem, Judea, Samaria, and to the earth. Yeah. So that would throw a wrench in his plans, if he has to make them walk 100 miles away from Jerusalem.
Awesome. That's great. What other questions do you have, folks? We're getting kind of close to the end here, and you guys may have some additional observations as well as we get ready to close. I want to leave a little bit of time tonight to talk about potential next steps. So, thoughts?
Where? The Ascension or the Great Commission?
Either.
Both on a mountain, yes.
He liked mountains.
He did. Who else liked mountains? God and Moses. So he's always bringing them up mountains, and their mountains are not easy to climb. You get a great view at the top, but Transfiguration, bring them up a mountain, show them what Moses did. Moses went up Mount Sinai 6 times. Yeah. One of the times he got to the top and God says, go back down and get Aaron. God loves when you climb a mountain. Elijah climbs a mountain. Moses climbs a mountain.
Wow.
Yeah. The mountain overlooking Upper Galilee, Mount Arbel, is nicknamed the Rabbi's Praying Mountain. So it seems to be that even when Jesus prays before choosing his disciples, it's almost certainly he would have gone there to overlook the cities that the disciples would come from and then pray over them. But we don't know. It never says that. But
yeah.
Isn't there that theory about the mountain where they say that Jesus was up on the mountain?
That's a really old ancient Near Eastern context from the time Genesis is written, the gods lived on mountains there's always rivers, there's always mountains because the gods are the givers of life and fruitfulness. And so if the gods are going to live anywhere, it'll be the highest point where there's streams of living water and there's vegetation because the gods provide life for us. So God does that in Genesis 1, but then brings humans in and says, I want you to do this with me, not just I'm on a mountain far away, but you're going to come do this with me.
For the word for garden, there is gan, which is built into a mountain.
It's a terraced hillside up to a mountain, in Genesis, but similar idea. That's definitely a different culture and time. But that is funny because in Jeremiah, Jerusalem becomes the mountain where streams of living water will flow out of them. Or Zechariah will become the one where the mountain with streams of living water flowing out of it. So yeah, it's but the ascension then happens at Mount of Olives on the east of Jerusalem, another mountain.
When he did the Sermon on the Mount, things like that.
That would have, this is my opinion. The Sermon on the Mount didn't happen how it says it happened. That would be unheard of for a rabbi to teach for 45 minutes or an hour. Almost certainly that is a collection of Jesus' teachings. That's why none of them really show that either. It's a collection of Jesus' teachings to show that after he's passed the test that Israel should have passed, the temptation with Satan, he then goes and gives a sermon on the mount like Moses would have read the law, read Deuteronomy to Israel. Matthew's really emphasizing how Jesus is the true Moses. So he gives him, has him giving a sermon like Deuteronomy to Israel. And all of the themes in the Sermon on the Mount is, you are the light of the nations, that's Israel. You are the salt of the earth, that's Israel. House divided can't stand, that's to Israel and Isaiah. So he's really emphasizing how all those are true and Jesus said that, but Matthew collects them and puts them on a mountain like at Sinai to show how he's Moses. I think that's Matthew's literary technique to do that. That's why all the other ones are much shorter, and Luke's has the same sermon but on a plane. It's on a plane somewhere.
Yes.
But so yeah, he does love his mountains. It's a very mountains. You can kind of trace the theme of mountains all throughout Bible, leading up to Revelation, where there's the prostitute woman who is on 7 mountains, which is exactly what Revelation is on their coins. Is there the woman on Rome is built on 7 mountains? So you can already see kind of what that's about. But,
No. Well, I'm intrigued as we get close to the end that Satan asked Jesus all the way back in chapter 4, I'll give you all the kingdoms of the world if you will bow down. And we see in one sense anyway, all of the kingdoms of the world now bowing down to Jesus. And so it's just, it's fascinating what, how Luke chooses to end, and even with the raising of the hands and the blessing, and they're worshiping him, staying, the phrase they stay continually at the temple doesn't mean that they were there 24 hours a day.
Never left.
It just means that they spent lots and lots of time there worshiping, but powerful close to a powerful gospel.
You want to talk about the ascension?
Sure.
I love the ascension. In my understanding, there are 3 themes working in the ascension. Where do I start? One is, I'll start with the most clear that we've kind of been talking about and won't take much explanation, but it's Jesus, ascends. So the question is why, and where did he ascend to? What does that mean? It's not because, but we'll stick with that, but where's he going and why? So we'd probably say he's going to heaven, whatever that means, but why? One image is he's the Son of Man, now exalted, seated at the right hand of the power of God. If you read Daniel 6 and 7, which is Daniel in the lion's den, and then the recapitulation of that in, the Son of Man scene. The Son of Man ascends to the right hand of the Ancient of Days to judge the world, to receive a kingdom that will be his forever and ever, and all the saints will worship him and rule with him. So this is Jesus saying, what I said would happen did happen. That's one theme, which is pretty cool. You could just do that and be pretty okay. A second one is in 44 BC, and this is where I think a great transition to Acts then is in 44 BC, Julius Caesar died. And I think this is cool because written to Theophilus, Luke is in Acts. He's a Roman, and he, of course, everyone in the world knew this story at that time, but this would have hit home for him. In July of 44 BC, Julius Caesar died, and his son and some few other witnesses just so happened to see a comet in the sky for 6 days at daylight. At the midday. That's how the story went. And the Roman council decided that was the spirit of Julius Caesar ascending to the right hand of Jupiter. Which then would make both Julius Caesar God and conveniently made Caesar Augustus the son of God. That's kind of how you deified yourself in the old world, was make your dad God, and then that makes you the son of God. It's pretty convenient. But what that is vindicating then him as the right-hand ruler of the world alongside Jupiter in Roman mythology. So I think that Roman audience would have heard that loud and clear, that who's Caesar? Jesus is the one who's seated at the right hand of the Ancient of Days, ruling the world. Which if that means Jesus is Lord and Caesar is not. And that will be the theme for Acts, is you go tell the world Jesus is Lord, Caesar is not. And that'll be the theme for Revelation. That'll be the theme for all Paul's writings. That'll be the theme for Galatians. Jesus is Lord and Caesar is not. The third theme is, I think, a really cool one. Speaking of Moses and mountains, it reminded me. When Moses went up Sinai in Exodus 15, Exodus, I can't remember what it is, but the golden calf scenario right before. He goes up Sinai and it says a cloud cover him. And it's exactly what it says in Luke and Acts. Jesus goes up and a cloud covers him, just like Moses going up to be with God on Sinai. So Jesus is clearly, going up to ascend with the Father. So we know where he's at. But I think one cool point is, what is Israel doing while Moses is up Sinai? So I think one question to ask yourself is, what are we doing while Jesus is with the Father before he comes back.
Hmm.
Will we be found with the golden calf? Will we be found worshiping Caesar? I think they would say, or worshiping other gods.
Hmm.
So there's three cool images that Luke uses as a launch pad for Acts, that
Yeah.
what will Christ's body, the church, be doing before he comes back? And what Lord will we give our allegiance to? And will we believe that, he's the Son of Man exalted to the right hand of God? Because if that's true, the real beast has been defeated, so we can go tell the world Jesus is Lord,
Yeah.
Pretty cool.
Yeah. That is really cool. Really cool. Thank you. Thank you. Okay. I want to stop recording. Thank you, everybody. Let me just not end the meeting. Let me stop recording, not end the meeting. Sorry.